Hello and welcome to the Sex Manifesto, where we explore the unspoken issues affecting our bodies, sex lives, and identities. I'm your host, Sarah Vaci. Just a little heads up, the Sex Manifesto does cover some adult themes, and you might hear some explicit language. Now on with the show. So let's begin by tell me a bit about who you are and start with your name and everything like that.
Right, well, my name is Guy W. Stoker. Very proud of the middle initial. Um, so I'm from Northumberland, and I've been a musician, a professional musician since 1992. Uh, I've had various different types of epileptic seizure since the age of 11. And I began to put those two experiences together many years later at Dartington College in 2008-10. And in that time, I actually realized that aspects of sexuality actually crossed over into those fields. So I was extremely curious to find out how those things actually come together
So
and influence one another.
what aspects of what similarities did you find?
Well, there's some people. Well, for a start, from a lyrical perspective, people have used the medium of music to describe their experiences or views on sexuality of various different degrees and natures for such a long time, but also equally they have used the arts as a medium for expressing the experience or thoughts around epilepsy as well. And in one such example, I think it was by an artist called Epilepsy. If my memory serves me right, it was a track called 187. He actually used the word seizure as a synonym for orgasm,
Wow.
and that's what got me curious. I thought, is he the only one to have done that, or are there other examples where the aspects of sexuality and epilepsy have come through music? And I actually found a number of cases where that had happened, including the work of Neil Young, who was someone who did have epilepsy and for many years tried to hide it, and in later times tried to bring his music forward off that fact, as some artists in the past have. And in one of his songs, he actually mentions the fact that because of his epilepsy, it was the song Expecting to Fly from 1967. It describes his sexual insecurity and his fear that actually he's going to have a seizure if he becomes sexually intimate with somebody,
And
which
is that something that you've experienced and you've explored yourself? Like, are those some of the issues that you've come across?
I've had that fear, certainly, yes. Knowing that the two events are direct, can in some cases be directly linked. I'm going to put a couple of disclaimers in here. I'm not a sexologist, I'm not a neurologist, but I am someone with a great interest in both fields and how both of those fields amalgamate in many cases. And there are over 40 different types of epileptic seizures which might surprise some people because when they think of the word epilepsy, they generally think of two different types of seizures, which were formerly known as petit mal or grand mal. Petit mal being a person biting the inside of the mouth or their eyes whirling around, but no more than that, and grand mal being where they would fall to the floor and shake and froth out the mouth. But in actual fact, there are at least 40 different types of epileptic seizure which manifest in a massively wide field of different ways, some of which include sexual manifestations and some of which include musical manifestations,
When you
which
say
is why
when you say sexual manifestations, can you clarify what you mean?
certainly it can be that actually a seizure will feel like an orgasm. It can also be, in some rare cases, that actually the patient, whilst they are in seizure state, will start masturbating or pelvic thrusting. But again, because it's in seizure state, it's an involuntary motion. It's the patient isn't aware at all that they're doing that. And also, it can be that seizures and orgasms can cause one another, which again, not many people are all that familiar about. When you put a seizure and an orgasm side by side, and if you were to make a list of the symptoms, for want of a better term, of those two events, you'd actually see several commonalities there, including the increased heart rate, the increased rate of respiration, the increased level of blood pressure, the involuntary muscular spasms, the non-verbal vocalization, i.e., some people make noises as they have an orgasm, and people make noises non-verbally as they're having a seizure. Both events can lead people to feel very fatigued afterwards, because of the muscular spasm and muscular tension. Both events can actually lead to a need to go to the toilet directly after. Uh, and in some cases, in the case of seizure, because they're not in total control of their bodily functions, that will happen anyway without the patient having the opportunity to make it out of the bed. So
Are
there
these some
are,
of the issues that you so when you were diagnosed, you were quite young, am I right?
when I started having the seizures, I was, but actually in my case, I wasn't diagnosed until quite later on. Um, but they did try me out on different medications, and obviously, as I will get to a little bit later on in our talk, any medication that is designed to alter the behavior of the brain is by default going to have consequences on the body. And and again, that's something from a neurological point of view and from an epilepsy treatment point of view that is quite often overlooked. When somebody's diagnosed with epilepsy and they say, right, we're going to give you this medication, what what they won't necessarily tell you is these could be the possible side effects or consequences of taking of taking these drugs. And I know from having spoken to doctors in the UK and the US that because of lack of training in communication of sexual issues with patients, they are often reluctant to actually bring up the subject of sexuality with epilepsy patients. And that there can be a number of reasons for that as well. It can be dependent on the relationship between the doctor and the patient. How open is that relationship? Also, how old the patient is, what the age gap between the patient and the doctor is, the state of seizure activity. It could be that really, if they're having a lot of seizures, then really they don't care what what the consequences are. They just want to stop having seizures.
Okay, so would you say one of the biggest issues, and this is the situation for me as well, is that that for first conversation with the doctor, where they're focusing on your medical situation, and they don't really think that your sexual life is relevant or that important in that moment. So when I was diagnosed with lichen sclerosis at 19, I don't remember anyone saying, "Oh, be careful because one day you may not be able to have sex or orgasms." So at 19, maybe that wasn't quite on my mind. But I feel like in those first conversations with your doctor, I feel like sex is overlooked.
It is very much overlooked. And I mean, if you look at the common side effects of anti-epilepsy medication, such as weight gain, fatigue, anxiety and depression, mood swings, sense of self-esteem, all of those things. Each one of them, let alone a combination thereof, is going to have a massive potential impact on your sex drive. You know, it might
So
not
do you think
be.
there's something missing?
It might not be that something doesn't necessarily work from a genital perspective, but if you look in the mirror and you don't like who's looking back at you, then you're not necessarily going to feel like a sexual being or feel attractive in any way to somebody else. And it could be that those things are also causing your mind to be taken up by so many other things that the last thing on your mind at any given point is being sexual. And it does have a very big impact. And what also needs to be stressed um, is the fact that anybody living with a disability, certainly if they are in a relationship, it's not only the person who has seizures who lives with epilepsy. That's what I've always highlighted whenever I've discussed this with anybody, is the fact that in my own case, I'm not the only person in my relationship who lives with epilepsy. My wife lives with epilepsy as well because she lives with me. So therefore, all of the things that I'm experiencing, if I don't like who I am, then my behavior is going to mirror that. So
Yeah.
therefore, it could well be that I actually put blocks up, and that could be potentially frustrating for the other partner, and could in turn put a great strain on the relationship. So again, giving somebody a pill uh, isn't necessarily the be all and end all of the treatment. And I think those potential relationship impacts, and certainly how you view yourself and how that changes you as a person, should definitely, absolutely be part of the discussion. And if it isn't with the physician, then there should be a dedicated person, such as an epilepsy specialist nurse, with whom you could actually have that conversation. because
I think the hard thing is that people are expected to be proactive. So here's your medication, but if you have any other issues relating to your condition, that's up to you to seek out a therapist. Or that's how I felt. Like the stuff I was told was devastating at 19, and I wasn't offered any emotional support. So I've had to just sort of process all of that myself. So I feel like this podcast is one small step, at least, to starting a dialogue, to raising awareness about these gaps, I feel, between people who might have social, physical or psychological issues, and embracing and celebrating the fact that we're all sexual beings with needs, and that doctors, not just doctors, but everyone needs to be a bit more aware of that, and to just start a whole dialogue around it.
Completely.
So hopefully this is one small
I'll carry the flag
do.
for that. Yes, I'll march down the street for that.
So when you I'm really curious about when they finally diagnosed you, and you had those first conversations with the doctor, and how old were you then? Were you were at the prime of your sexual awakening or something like that? So you didn't have those conversations?
Where would have normally been, yes. I was
So you didn't have those
27.
conversations. So you didn't have those conversations. And so if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how did you navigate your epilepsy with your sexual explorations?
Well, like many people, it wasn't an easy journey to navigate. One of the reasons why, and as I say, this is not unique to me, it's something that many people face, is that if their seizure activity is unpredictable, then actually the opportunity for them to be alone with somebody, with a potential partner, in order for that sexual exploration to take place, is extremely difficult to come by. I.e., if the seizures can happen at any time, then there's generally got to be someone else around. And obviously, if someone else is around more or less all the time, then sexual exploration is something which has to be put on hold, and put on hold, and put on hold, and put on hold, and put on hold, which in itself can create a difficulty, in the sense that the longer something is put on hold, the more pressure the person might build up themselves, i.e., I should have been able to do this by now, or I should have had experience in this by now. So therefore, any potential sexual partner is going to think that because of my age, I must already know how to do this. I must have already experienced that or the other. And it could well be that on them finding out that, no, I haven't, then they would rethink the choice of whether or not to sexually engage with someone who, A, is extremely inexperienced, and B, has a physical health condition which could manifest at the very point of intimacy.
I would say that sorry. I would say that two things about that I quite like. It wouldn't faze me if someone wasn't very experienced, because I quite like the idea of learning together. And when you get to my ripe old age, you might you meet people who feel like they already know it all. They know what they like, and they're not really. They feel like they've done all their experimenting, and they're quite set in their ways. So it's actually really refreshing, I think, to sometimes meet someone who's like, I've always fancied trying these things, but actually I never have. So it wouldn't faze me personally. But the other thing that I was thinking, and it's if this is too personal, then just let me know. Even before being sexual with someone else, am I right in thinking that masturbating can also trigger a seizure? So that could cause some awkward situations, perhaps?
It's not as common as intercourse
Okay.
that seizure would. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I would say it would be less likely to occur as a result of masturbation than as a result of intercourse. Um, but certainly, yes, again, if somebody after you've gone to bed is repeatedly kind of listening in to check that you're all right, or walking past the door to check that you're all right, or not very far from the bathroom door to make sure something's not happening in there, then again, the opportunities for self sexual exploration do become fairly limited. And so it's not. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it can be a very limiting window of opportunity for somebody living with epilepsy to actually get onto that wheel or onto that road of sexual exploration in the first place.
So how did you start your sexual journey in terms of you had your diagnosis, then you had to deal with that because I know we've
Well,
talked.
actually, mine was before uh, my actual diagnosis, and it just got to the point where mentally I felt um, that I didn't want to go any longer without having at least a experience of sexual intimacy with somebody. So therefore, I did make that happen. And but another very important thing to highlight is that when patients are on anti-epilepsy medication, it does interfere with blood pressure. That's one of the very common side effects. And obviously, any medication that is altering the patient's blood pressure will um, lead to, or most likely lead to, erectile dysfunction in men and vaginal dryness in women, because both sexual organs are vasculated. So therefore, both sexual organs, male and female, rely on an increased blood flow. Uh, so therefore, because the anti-epilepsy medication makes the brain more selective as to where the blood goes, then the genital area is considered by the brain as not as important as, say, the heart or lungs. So therefore, the brain becomes more choosy as to where it sends that blood. And in turn, many people with anti-epilepsy medication do experience sexual dysfunction, whether male or female. However, in the case of male patients, if they take medication, I don't know about being able to give labels, so I'll say it's a blue tablet that's widely known about um, for men,
Okay.
and no prizes for guessing which one I'm talking about. Um, but that actually is a common trigger of epileptic seizure because it actually increases the blood pressure. That's how that medication works, is by increasing the blood pressure. And increased blood pressure is a very common trigger of epileptic seizure. So in actual fact, by trying to remedy erectile dysfunction, you are essentially putting yourself at very high risk of epileptic seizure, which some people know and some people don't. An epileptic seizure, by definition, every year proves to be fatal to a number of people, because obviously, if the electrical activity in the brain has gone completely haywire, then that haywire activity could well tell the heart to stop.
And am I right in
And
thinking that you went on a journey of in your sexual exploration of not focusing so much on intercourse and on some on various you went on a kind of journey in terms of exploring your
yeah,
sexuality.
hmm yeah. I mean, when you're faced with something like that, you have to kind of throw the stereotypical design out of the window and think, well, okay, if it's not going to work this way, then we need to look at other ways that it can work. I.e., and if you look at the work of, say, the likes of Tracy Cox and Emily Morse and Hannah Witten and Justin Levenier and various other people like that, they will all say that actually John Price is another one, um, is that the stereotypical definition of sex, i.e., vaginal penetration, is actually only one very, very, very minute part of what I like to refer to as the menu of sexuality. And the thing to realize, which helps people even who don't have sexual challenges, is that actually the 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 most important sex organ in the human body is the brain, because the brain is where it all starts, and the brain is also what receives all of the information that it picks up from the body, which gets sent back to the brain. So therefore, the genital area is actually only one very, very small piece of information, because you have the whole of the human body that is essentially a potential erogenous zone. You can get heightened levels of pleasurable sensation literally anywhere at all on the human body. I came across a case about a month ago where an American man had an accident on holiday and he'd become quadriplegic, but he slowly over time developed sensation in his fingers, and he described that actually his thumb became his surrogate penis, because stimulation of his thumb actually gave him a similar sensation that he'd previously had in his penis.
Wow.
So therefore, what the brain had done had kind of rerouted those sensations. So that pleasurable sensation that used to come from the penis was now coming was not gone forever, but had simply been transferred to another source.
That's amazing.
And
That really does show how the brain, how um, how the brain is linked with the body. And I mean, some of the best experiences I've had have also not been intercourse focused. And I definitely am curious in the future to explore tantra and things like that. Are those things that you've explored yourself?
to a certain extent, yes. I mean, tantra. There's a very good friend of mine, very dear friend of mine, called Pollyanna Burton, who has a who also does podcasts as well. She's a nurse, and she's also a sex educator and tantra instructor. and she's a great well of information, and obviously on the, if you like, the entertainment world side of it, Sting was a great uh, fan of publicly a great fan of tantra, um, which again highlights the fact that actually there are so many ways to experience sexual pleasure that do not involve vaginal penetration or penetration of any kind. So therefore, it really hammers home, which I do very much when I'm talking to people, that actually, if you're not in a situation where you can have intercourse, that doesn't mean that you can't have sex by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, many people have experienced higher levels of sensation and orgasmic sensation, etc., from stimulation coming from other parts of the body. You know,
And
uh,
why do you
so
feel, I'm gonna ask this of all my guests, why do you feel sex is important?
because it is, I would say, it's a holistic experience. It's very, I would say, it's very, I would say very little of it is to do with experiencing an orgasm. It is that holistic experience of feeling that closeness to somebody. Even a hug is a very pleasurable experience. That feeling of warmth, that feeling of human contact. And obviously, yes, to a certain, you can experience some things through masturbation, but there are other things that do require uh, a third party, if you like, not necessarily a third person, unless that's an avenue that you're going to go down, but certainly another person to be involved, just to share that body to body experience.
Hmm.
And
And what do
so
you,
therefore,
yeah,
go
no,
on.
carry on. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, so therefore, it's, I mean, there's neuronal activity and there's hormonal activity and all the rest of it, and all of which heighten the level of well-being in a person that are that come as a result from sexual contact.
Yeah,
So,
totally. And you
uh-huh.
talked a little bit about. I'm quite curious about some of the other issues surrounding being a sexual person with epilepsy.
Mm,
And you mentioned about
mm-hmm,
the conflict with medication. But what about when you
mm-hmm,
first meet someone and those awkward conversations and deciding when you might tell them? So, can you think of
mm-hmm.
any examples from your
Yeah,
own life?
I mean, it can be extremely difficult because on the one hand, you don't want someone to find out that you have epilepsy because you have a seizure uh, during an intimate experience with them, which, as I say, can happen. But equally, if you are getting to the point where you do want to become intimate with someone, then there can be a mental hurdle which makes you think, do I actually want to tell this person that I have this major condition? Because it could be that if they find out, or when they find out that I have this major condition, that they feel actually that's not something that I want to spend the rest of my life dealing with,
It's a deal breaker.
and that might,
Yeah.
yeah, a deal breaker, very, very much so. So therefore, that can cause anguish, and obviously, one of the biggest killers of sexual function is anguish.
So,
You know,
can you talk about any particular moments or awkward moments, or how how you've navigated that yourself. Like, how have you decided, I'm going to say something before anything happens, or in a blissful moment when you know that it's getting serious? Because I found in my own experience with my medical conditions that that is, your heart leaps to your throat and you think, I really like them, but I need to stop. Like, you do have this moment, like, I really like that person. I think they really like me, but I can feel myself falling for them. So I'm going to say something before that happens. And it's
Hmm.
a pretty scary moment, I think, for a lot of people who have conditions that affect their sex and love life. So,
Hmm.
so what have
And
you?
there have, I was going to say there have been instances in the past where I've actually kept myself at a distance uh, rather than taking that step. Uh, so rather than allowing it to actually develop into a sexual experience, um, I've actually had really strong desires for somebody that actually I didn't allow to go any further for risk of losing absolutely everything. I've kind of taken, there were instances where I kind of took the second prize, if you like. And it obviously, with everybody can talk in past tense and say, well, actually, no, you should have done that or you should have done the other. But actually, in that moment, I felt that it was better to have some form of constant interaction with somebody than go from what was there to nothing at all, which would have been potentially even more painful than kind of putting the block in front of myself.
And how's your situation
So,
now? I think everything is. Oops. Wait for the camera to adjust. I think everything
yeah,
is going quite well. Am I right in thinking that?
yeah. Everything is spot on now. Yes, everything is absolutely fine now.
You're married,
Um,
aren't you?
I am. Yes,
Well,
yes.
that's very
I've
exciting.
Yes, I've been with my wife for 23 years now,
Wow.
and
So all these
yeah,
issues happened quite a while ago then. And then
yeah, yeah.
how did you, just as much as you're happy to share, how did you navigate those early days with your wife then?
It might sound very um, novel like or romantic novel like or whatever, but once I was in that situation, everything did to a large extent just seem to kind of resolve itself because I knew I was completely in that place of total safety, you know, and so therefore, because the fear wasn't there, the manifestations that go with that fear didn't arrive either,
So
you know.
so she was someone who was just totally cool with everything, and you felt
Yeah.
like here's someone I can trust and I can be
Hmm.
myself around. That is so
Yeah.
fabulous.
Hmm.
And
It is. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a
Yeah.
really tricky, it can be so tricky feeling.
It can.
It's about
Hmm.
vulnerability, isn't it? And being vulnerable
It,
with someone.
100% vulnerability. Yeah. But actually, when you find the person that you do trust to be that vulnerable with, then, as I say, not everything, but a lot of other things do just kind of fall into place. And as I say, it's understanding, it's having that understanding that I mentioned before, that actually the world of sex is so much bigger than than penetration. You know, that is not everything by any stretch of anyone's imagination. Um, Obviously, for some people, their sex education is pornography, and that creates a lot of illusions that people judge themselves by, and think, well, I can't make my partner do that, or my body doesn't look like theirs, or I can't go for that long, or all sorts of other things. And some people need reminding that actually what they are seeing on the screen is not reality, and at times they need that help to actually distinguish between fantasy and reality.
I think real sex is always smellier, messier, noisier,
Yeah,
like
it
more
is
succulent
definitely.
than
Uh-huh.
anything that we've.
Yeah,
And there's always like silly,
particularly
embarrassing
earlier on.
moments. Yeah, there's always
Yeah.
those awkward,
Uh-huh.
like you're going in the wrong, in the wrong
Yeah,
hole.
don't touch me there. No, I don't like that.
Yeah, or
But
whatever it might be.
that's that segues very, very well onto the next bit, which is the ABCC.
All right.
Yes, which is in a real and physically intimate relationship, then anybody again who you read about, whose material you read, will tell you that it comes down to aims, boundaries, communication, and consent, or consent and communication. But basically, none of us are telepathic. I know that might come as a surprise to some people, but we're not telepathic. We don't automatically know what the other person likes or doesn't like. You know, there has to be. You have to know in yourself what you want to try out, but also equally what you don't want to go anywhere near. And you have to have that conversation in whatever form it might be. It might be through a game of truth or dare, or make a list of yes, no, maybe, or whatever.
That sounds fun.
Um, but yeah, but actually have that communication, so that the person you are intimate with knows that this is a yes, that's a no, and from time to time that's a maybe. But in order for anything to be a yes, it has to be two yeses.
Yeah, totally. Like I really, this is
Uh-huh.
what I was saying earlier, that certainly over 40, the guys who
Mm-hmm.
I've met, they're like, this is what I like, and this is what I really want to do with you. And they are not necessarily, this is not obviously all men, but a lot of them, they're like, well, I really love doing that. And then the other
Mm-hmm.
person is like, well, I really don't love doing that. And then you have a real conflict. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
about the younger generation, and if they are equally, if they are more open-minded to sort of
Mm.
navigate the middle ground.
Mm.
Hopefully some of them will be. And just to
Mm.
not be, I think it's so important never to be set in your ways, and to be open to know your boundaries, but still be open to
Yes,
listening to what the other person may or may
absolutely.
not like. And if you like
Yeah.
them enough, hopefully
Mm-hmm.
they won't just be like, well, if you don't want to do that one thing, then, that's my favorite thing. That
That's
you can
it.
still
Game
work your
over.
way around that. And
Mm-hmm.
similarly, in terms of medical conditions and things like that, if there's something that person says, well, I'm afraid I can't do that one thing that you really would like to, that
Mm-hmm.
you can work around that, and
Yeah.
to totally
Perhaps we can get to the same finishing line by going a different route. Kind of
bananas
sat
instead
nav,
of
if you like.
oranges or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, sat nav for example. We
Yeah,
know where
sat
we
nav.
want to get to. Yeah, we know where we want to get to, but it might not be a direct line. You might have to go
Yeah, and being
via somewhere
creative.
else.
like totally
Yes, exactly.
being creative in the bedroom and not.
Hmm.
I feel like some in my situation I have felt a bit focused on the negative and what I can't do, and it's only now that
Hmm.
I'm really starting to
It's
think, okay, so
it is
that
very easy
probably,
to do that.
yeah, so
It
that
is
probably isn't
extremely easy
possible.
to do that. Yeah. Uh-huh.
But then
Uh,
look at what you can
Also,
do.
it's yeah, precisely. Yeah. And it is very much, I mean, that framing of mind, but also that framing of speech as well is extremely powerful. So if you say, I can't do this, then you are creating a negativity of yourself. Whereas if you say, these are the things that I can do, then you haven't told any lies. You haven't necessarily told anything different, but you have put yourself in a much more positive frame, you know. So, which obviously in any walk of life is a great tool to have. Is just reframing how you talk about either what you can do or what you do want, because um, obviously the mind and body are very much interlinked with one another. So therefore, if you are focusing on the negative side, then your body is going to respond accordingly.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I've totally experienced that
mhm,
kind of thing. So a lot of people with my medical conditions can't have intercourse, and they really focus on that. I mean, I have my
mhm.
own theories that we are very intercourse focused because
Yes.
sex is kind of seen as a, well, I feel like the patriarchy has affected how sex is portrayed, and it's
Hmm.
very, the dialogue we have is it's about intercourse and orgasm, and
Yeah.
definitely there's more of
Yeah.
a focus on the male orgasm. I'm sorry to say there is,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
I'm working myself on rewriting the my internal dialogue and not feeling
Yes.
like I've got a failed body if there's things I can't do, and
Hmm.
really trying to focus on that. So
Yeah.
I think at the end of today we're going to listen to one of your pieces called Seizure. What are
Right.
you, and you're at the moment you're still writing music and you're studying psychology, is
Hmm.
that right?
I am. Yes, I'm doing a master's in psychology. Yes.
And are you going
Uh-huh.
to still focus on epilepsy, or what do you think the future holds for you?
My focus at the moment, or my main level of interest at the moment, is actually sexuality and disability, for obvious reasons. Um, and I have done quite a bit of research recently on that, and come across some fantastic works and some brilliant people who I do intend to reach out to and say, I'm here, let's talk. You know, um, certainly one of the things that I heard many times was that from a sexual perspective, many people who live with disabilities feel invisible. They feel that the designer sex uh, industry, etc., or the beauty products, or the fashion industry, or whatever, is not geared towards them. And while some people see that again as a negative, uh, some have actually said that actually that invisibility is a very positive tool, because then it lets them be totally free of expectation.
Ah, that's a good way of
And
looking at it.
yeah, and that freedom from expectations means that you can genuinely be you, because you're not trying to conform to be somebody else. And there's there was also a lady in America. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she was a disabled lady, and she actually produced a beauty calendar of women with disabilities, and it was a very powerful tool, and it really did take off big time. And it just kind of highlights the fact that actually, yes, there is certainly an aesthetic level, but what should also be highlighted is actually there is much more to a person than what you see on the outside, you know.
No,
Um,
absolutely.
and there's also this expectation or stereotype within able-bodied society that people with a disability are therefore asexual, uh, can't possibly have sexual feelings or desires, uh, that a person, if they're in a wheelchair, mustn't really know what they want, mustn't really be able to make their own decisions. And again, that is something which very, very, very quickly and at a very high level needs to be redressed. Because, say, for example, someone is in a wheelchair because their legs don't work, that that doesn't mean that none of the rest of their body does. And as I
Absolutely.
referred to earlier, the biggest and most important sexual organ in the human body isn't the legs, it's the brain.
So
You
in a
know,
minute, we're going to have a listen to the tune called Seizure, which I find very interesting because I can. It does
because
make
it's
me.
awful.
Okay, well,
but
why did
but
you say that?
ah,
Okay, we
it,
can
I
choose a
was going to
different
say
one. No, it
no,
really.
no, choose that.
It
But
really makes me
I'll
think what a seizure must be like. But also, as
yeah.
I was listening, I was trying, as I've listened to it, it was making me think about orgasms as well. And if I can feel some kind of similarity when I listen to it. So I think that's
Mm,
very interesting.
mm,
But
well,
as we're
yeah.
coming to the end, what I really want to know is what is the one thing you would add to the sex manifesto? What is the one thing you think we need to raise awareness of or change in terms of a dialogue, perhaps around epilepsy and sexuality? What would you put in that if we could make it manifest and actually happen? What would it be?
Pinning me down to one thing is, as you'll come to realize, is a very difficult task. But I'm, I would certainly want to highlight that we, even people without epilepsy, we are all unique. We don't we don't fit in nice and neatly to boxes. We are all unique blends. We are all recipes, if you like. We all have different ingredients, but we are all a unique recipe, and that's something that should actually be celebrated. So I would say that would quite possibly be the thing that I would want to put in there.
You mean, but
And
you also mean in terms of epilepsy or sexuality? You mean unique
yeah,
in what
yeah.
way?
Well, for example, me as someone who's lived with both, um, you could get 100 people into your room who have epilepsy and are sexual beings, and all 100 people would be unique. So just because somebody ticks both of those boxes doesn't necessarily mean by any stretch of anyone's imagination that they are the same people. So I think whilst you can contextualize and say, yes, this person meets this criteria, I think it's so vital that we acknowledge and celebrate that actually we are all unique.
Cool. No, that's a good way. You're right that we have to bear in mind that we don't all tick all those boxes, and everything that you thought about that person might, be open to their beautiful uniqueness, I suppose, something like that. So thank you very much, Guy, for speaking to me. And we will have a listen to Seizure, because I find it a very intriguing piece of music. And thank you very much for being on my show.
Great pleasure, and I'll speak to you
Do you want
soon.
me to play Seizure? Why did you say it was a bad piece?
I'll reword that, and rather than say bad piece or an awful piece, it was designed within the album, which is called Ictal Variations, which is a musical journey through epilepsy, to try and convey something that you can't necessarily always convey verbally. It's a seizure, again, is a unique experience to all those who have it. But in general, a seizure is a very unpleasant experience because it sends you into a different level of consciousness. You can experience audio hallucinations, you can experience visual hallucinations, obviously the shaking, the unpleasant noises that people make during seizure, and basically the electrical overdrive that's happening in the brain. Whilst I've given some description of it, if you ask somebody what's it like to experience a seizure, that can be actually very, very difficult to pin down. So the idea of that piece, Seizure, was to actually give that manifestation a voice. So
So it's
no,
not a bad piece. You mean it
yeah,
feels unpleasant? It's
yes,
a hard piece. It's not
yeah,
that long. So I think it's about a minute and
thereabouts,
a
yeah,
half,
yeah,
something like that. And it definitely recreates a sense of what
yeah,
it must be
from the
like
inside,
for you. So I
from
find
the
it very
inside out
interesting.
rather than from the outside in.
Yeah.
Uh, and
And I will link to some of your more recent musical pieces and some of the very interesting things that you've written. I will
yeah,
link to that as well. So, so stay tuned
thank you very
for
much.
Seizure. You've been listening to the Sex Manifesto with me, Sarah Vaci, where we discuss the unspoken issues surrounding our bodies, sex lives, and identities.